Okay, again, I'm Jerry Gipson, very pleased to be here with you today. As Sid said, Ray Topping and I will be sharing duties on this presentation, and what we're going to do is step back a little bit and look at this from a broader industry perspective. And also, both of us are here representing FIATEC, which is an industry advocacy and delivery group, and you'll hear more about FIATEC as we go through the presentation. So basically what we're going to try to do here, I'll cover some background material, try to frame the industry problem and opportunity around project risk management. Ray will come in and talk about some specific things that are happening around solutions that are available and how they're being used. So just 2 seconds on background for both of us. Ray and I both have prior careers in industry. Ray was CH2M Hill, myself with Dow Chemical, and we both are closely associated and still are with FIATEC. I was on the board of directors, am the past chaired that organization between 2010 and 2012. Ray is the current director. And so again, for example, I'm not here representing Dow Chemical any longer, but obviously that plays very heavily into my view of industry needs and directions. So just a word to open on FIATEC. Again, we're here representing FIATEC primarily. FIATEC is a global community of passionate stakeholders working collaboratively to lead development and adoption of technologies and innovative practices to achieve the highest business value throughout the life cycle of capital projects. So a few key things there. One is, and I'll show you a little bit more about our membership, we are a little bit different than some organizations in that we have owners, we have EPCs, we have technology and software providers, we have academia, and then we also have partners who are working on different parts of this larger industry problem. And so the idea being a large group of stakeholders all playing a part in this idea of developing and managing capital assets for maximum value. One other key thing is when we look at the concept of capital asset can be a process facility, it can be a mine, it can be a ship, it can be upstream oil equipment, it can be any aspect of capital asset potentially comes into play, although traditionally we have a little bit more focus through our membership in the buildings area and the larger process industries. So then here when you look at membership, you can see we have a large, and it is a large and evolving and growing membership. But again, you see that broad representation from different groups who participate strongly in this whole process of delivering and managing capital assets. And then you also see, it's covered a little bit, but then you can start to see some of the groups that we partner with as well. And I won't go into those now, but we can answer questions in the panel if needed. So I like to step back on this. Sid said, let's talk about managing project risk. So I wanted to step back and take a simple view. What are we really talking about here? And so, a basic, stair-step of premise. One, let's define project risk. Well, it's a probability of chance of not meeting desired outcomes, of failing. Okay, a very, very simple, crude definition, but I think one that works. A second, question, but I think the answer is absolutely yes. Do all projects entail risk? Yes, they do. Some projects entail more risk, some projects entail less. It's our job to understand that relative scale of risk that we're needing to understand, needing to manage. Another question, can risk be characterized? Can it be quantified? Can it be managed? And the answer, I think, absolutely is yes. Some organizations are doing this very successfully, some organizations less so, but I think we'd also have to say that we see variability if we look across larger industry in terms of not managing risk and then recognizing the consequence of not doing so. Another point is what's out there in terms of know-how, either within owner or other accountable organizations, in industry, consultants, advocacy and industry groups, what's out there in terms of knowledge, assistance, guidance. And I think anyone who's looked in this area already knows it's huge. So is there a huge collateral on how to effectively manage risk? The answer is absolutely. So that brings us to we should be doing well, right? Are we doing well? Well, and the answer again is it's variable. In some organizations, relatively well, probably with some outliers. But overall, there's quite some variability, and there are some big instances of taking the consequences of unmanaged risk. So just a couple of examples. Many of you are familiar with Ed Merrow and the Independent Projects Analysis Organization, IPA, and Ed has spoken for many, many years on the whole subject of mega projects as this segment has increased in terms of the overall fraction of mega projects within the global capital projects industry, mega projects that are being executed. And the fact is that today, a majority of these projects still fail in some significant fashion. Another study by Accenture that was fairly recent is focused on energy projects, and one of the bottom lines, 70% of energy projects have not met budget, 85% have not met schedule. So why? Why is this happening, and what can we do to keep it from happening? And this is both obviously a very important consideration from the standpoint of owners and other accountable entities like EPCs, but as well to larger industry, because again, I think we all assume just by being here that there is significant commonality in terms of the definition of what constitutes best practices in capital asset development and delivery and management, and then also some of the best practices around how you quantify and manage risk. So, is there collateral out there? And again, I don't intend to be exhaustive in my survey, but the answer is if we look at some of the organizations out there, and there are many, many more, there is. And so in groups that are into industry best practice, for groups that are associated with standards development, for groups that are focused on consultancy, expertise centers within companies, absolutely, there's this, again, large level of knowledge, know-how, and either known or potential best practice available to us. So again, not to read through this in detail, but just to try to summarize, I think we all understand that when we talk about risk and both impacts and what causes the risk, there are some fairly well-established categories that again we fall into if we look at impacts and causes. In the impact area, typically the list is not very long. It is the associated goals that we typically use to both set what we want our project to accomplish and how we measure performance. And one thing we should do in the safety, we should always understand that safety, security, health, environmental. But we have to look at business return, which is also quality. One of the things about cost is in terms of asset delivery, we're not just implying a project impact if we have a cost overrun or a cost impact. This is actually typically an impact on the life cycle performance as well. So it comes to us not just now, but later. In terms of risk factors, again, I'll just point to a few of these. Again, you would see these come up again and again in terms of what are some of the key factors of consideration if we're evaluating risk. But, for example, team strength and dynamics. We know strong team players, strong teams, strong dynamics between teams, and then Sandy talked a little bit about increasingly how we have many more players. That's also part of the team and the people dynamic on successful or unsuccessful projects. Partnerships. We have more projects that have multiple owners, multiple accountable parties. How do you manage that? Supply chain is being more recognized as something that can significantly impact the success of a project and is often an unmanaged risk. The bottom two, anything new or unproven. Often we make assumptions about managing unknowns or even not understanding the level of unknown. And then another, as again we see projects being executed in different parts of the world, bigger projects, much more complexity being added over what we've traditionally executed in the past, then you can just ask that question. You have many risk factors that are actually happening together, and so the negative synergy in this case, it multiplies significantly. So a few additional trends which are pushing us to higher risk, and I already mentioned some of these, and these are often cited. Emerging regions, increasingly larger projects and mega projects, supply chain, and the larger networks of resource supply that are necessary to execute the projects. Driving for productivity improvement. Again, Sandy, you represented, you're constantly driven to do more with less. Well, how do you do it? Well, figuring out how to do it and bridging the gap, that's a risk because you're doing something new. Regulations, and again, this ties also into working in emerging regions and new areas. And then the joint venture opportunities comes back to this idea of multiple accountable entities, which drastically complicates this idea of who's managing what, who's accountable for what, and risk. So let's talk just a second about opportunity, and let's talk about this in terms of the gap closure opportunity. And what we see here, and there are many other studies, and Ray can, I'm sure, cite others, if you look at construction industry, it is lagging. It is lagging behind other segments in terms of productivity. So one of these studies shows that relative to other industries, productivity is falling in construction. And then also we see very often when we look at the productivity over time or the measures of productivity, that construction is and we can imply this larger look at design, the whole process, but this is really a specific focus on construction. But the idea here being that there is a big productivity opportunity, which also goes back to practices that allow us to better manage risk. So I'll go through this one and then I'll transfer to Ray. And what I'm trying to represent here is an answer to the question, how do we achieve a fully capable approach to capital asset delivery? And this is really operating on two levels. One level is within a project, within an accountable organization. So, for example, an owner. And so for that accountable entity, you would ask the question, do I have a strategic context, a consistent strategic context that's driving the projects and setting the goals for the projects? Do I have appropriate governance in place? Do I have the right control structure? Do I have the IT systems? Do I have the information access? On the technology side, do I have the right technology for executing my projects? Do I have the right practices for adopting new technology? For example, if I'm bringing a new unit operation into my oil or chemical plant, do I actually know how to do that and manage that risk? On the people side, there's key players, there's project team dynamics, and then there's the larger scale, which is really out there for all of us now in terms of many more players on even your average project. And in terms of processes, this is also in some sense a technology question. Are we employing robust processes, and do we have continuous improvement, and are we searching for the current and the future best practice in terms of the processes that we're executing? So, Ray?